What up, though? Welcome to the 15th installment of Black Americans Don't Have Culture. And by Black Americans, we properly mean Americans, the only Americans there ever was, is, and will be. Throughout history and in antiquity, we've been called American Indians. The Races of Men, second edition. The Races of Men, a philosophical inquiry into the influence of race over the destinies of nations by Robert Knox, MD. London, 1862. The work I here present to the world has cost me much thought and anxiety, the views it contains being wholly at variance with long received doctrines, stereotyped prejudices, national delusions, and a physiology and a cosmogony based on a fantastic myth as old, at least, as the Hebrew record. Each race treated of in this little work will complain of my not having done them justice. Of all others, they will admit that I have spoken the truth. The placing the Slavonian and Gothic races foremost amongst men, first and greatest in philosophy, will much, I believe, astonish the men of other races. The Saxon and the Celt, the Italian and the Sarmatian. The inordinate self esteem of the Saxon will be especially shocked thereby, nor will he listen with composure to a theory which tells him, proves to him, that his race cannot domineer over the earth, cannot even exist permanently on any continent to which he is not indigenous, cannot ever become native, true born Americans, cannot hold in permanency any portion of any continent but the one on which he first originated. And I've said once and I'll say it again. We all sprout up from a earth soil portion. Your home needs you and you need it. If you noticed, most of the indigenous people are of other soil portions are not necessarily amongst the waves of foreigners that come here to America. For instance, you don't see waves of the indigenous people to the soil portion that is termed Mexico coming to America. At least I haven't. I disclaim all pretensions of attempting a complete history of mankind, even from the single point of view from which I contemplate human history. No materials exist for such a history. Of man's origin, we know nothing correctly. Let that sink in. Of man's origin, we know nothing correctly. But you have people who will go back thousands of years. You even have people who will tell you that the earth is millions or billions of years old and the universe is the same. How can someone who is 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old tell you about something that happened a billion years ago? How can these people, the people who are 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, tell you about something that happened 10,000 years ago? What? Because they have machines and gadgets? Of man's origin, we know nothing correctly. We know not when he first appeared in space. His place in time then is unknown. The morale of a race has little or nothing to do with its religion. I offer the English invasion of Hindustan in proof, the invasion of Sind and Afghan, the plunder of China. A profitable war is a pleasant thing for a Saxon nation, and a crusade against the heathen has always been declared praiseworthy. And when he speaks of Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon, he is speaking of the people who you term white today in America. We're not talking about what people fill out on their census forms currently. If anyone insists with me that a Negro or a Tasmanian accidentally born in England becomes thereby an Englishman, I yield the point. But should he further insist that he, the said Negro or Tasmanian, may become also a Saxon or Scandinavian, I must contend against so ludicrous an error. And yet errors like this are committed daily by well-educated and well-informed persons. With me, race or hereditary descent is everything. It stamps the man. As the origin of these races is lost in the past, I trace them from the present toward the past, from the partially known to the totally unknown. The races of men, as they now exist on the globe, constitute a fact which cannot be overlooked. They differ from each other widely, most widely, but that such differences exist, and important ones too, has not been denied. The word race is of daily use, applied even to man, since the war of race commenced in continental Europe and in Ireland. No expression is of more frequent occurrence than the term race. The most illustrious name applied to any race has been the Roman, and yet it does not appear that there ever was any distinct race to which this name could be applied. This is human history. Abstract terms have been invented to express relations which do not exist. No, no race interests us so much as the Saxon, or as I prefer calling him for reasons to be afterwards explained, the Scandinavian. He is about to be the dominant race on the earth. A section of the race, the Anglo-Saxon, has for nearly a century been all-powerful on the ocean, the grand tyrants by sea, the British. Forget for a time the word nation and ask yourselves whence come the people composing any ancient assemblage called a nation, a state, a republic, a monarchy, an empire. Ask yourselves this plain question: are they indigenous to the soil, or have they migrated from somewhere else? And if so, have they altered in structure, in character? As a living and material being, the history of man is included in the history of the organic world. He is of this world. He did not create it. He creates nothing. You cannot separate his history from the organic world. Apart, no doubt, he stands, but all species stand apart from each other quite as much as he does from them. To me, the Caledonian Celt of Scotland appears a race as distinct from the lowland Saxon of the same country as any two races can possibly be, as Negro from American, Hottentot from Kaffir, Eskimo from Saxon. With me, the Anglo-Saxon in America is a Saxon and not a native. The Celt will prove a Celt wherever he is born, wherever he is found. The possible conversion of one race into another I hold to be a statement contradicted by all history. It was Columbus, I think, who said to Ferdinand and Isabella, "The world is not so vast as people suppose." At no period does the world seem ever to have been overloaded with life, overpeopled with human beings. A wish to serve Africa forms the excuse for an expedition to the Niger. The real object being the enslaving the unhappy Negro, disposing him of his lands and freedom. I prefer the manly robber to this speaking, canting hypocrisy. I prefer the manly robber to this sneaking, canting hypocrisy peculiar to modern civilization and to Christian Europe. So here the author says, a wish to serve Africa forms the excuse for an expedition to the Niger. The real object being the enslaving the unhappy Negro. So he associates Negro with Africa. Now, whether the earth be overpopulated or not, one thing is certain: the strong will always grasp at the property and lands of the weak. I have been assured that this conduct is not at all incompatible with the highest moral and even Christian feeling. I had fancied that it was, but I have been assured of the contrary. The doctrine which teaches us to love our neighbors as ourselves is admirable, no doubt, but a difficulty lies somewhere or other in the way. What is that difficulty, which all seem to know and feel, yet do not like to avow? It is the difference of race. Ask the Dutch Boer whence comes his contempt and inward dislike to the Hottentot, the Negro, the Kaffir. Ask him for his warrant to reduce these unhappy races to bondage and to slavery, to rob them of their lands and to enslave their children, to deny them the inalienable right of man to a portion of the earth on which he was born. Again, he associates the Negro with Africa. When the word race, as applied to man, is spoken of, the English mind wanders immediately to distant countries, to Negroes and Hottentots, red Indians and savages. The European races, so called, differ from each other as widely as the Negro does from the Bushman, the Kaffir from the Hottentot, the red Indian of America from the Eskimo from the Basque. Blumenbach and Pritchard have misled the public mind so much in this respect. Lastly, carrying out the destinies of his race, obeying his physical and moral nature, the Anglo-Saxon, aided by his insular position, takes possession of the ocean, becomes the great tyrant at sea. Ships, colonies, commerce, these are his wealth, therefore his strength. A nation of shopkeepers grasps at universal power, founds a colony, the States of America, such as the world never saw before, loses it as a result of the principle of race. Nothing daunted, founds others, to lose them all in succession, and the same reasons, race. A handful of large-handed, spatula-fingered Saxon traders holds military position of India or Hindustan. Meantime, though divided by nationalities into different groups as English, Dutch, German, United States man, cordially hating each other, the race still hopes ultimately to be masters of the world. In all climes and under all circumstances, the Saxons are a tall, powerful, athletic race of men, the strongest as a race on the face of the earth. They have fair hair with blue eyes and so fine a complexion that they may almost be considered the only absolutely fair race on the face of the globe. Generally speaking, they are not a well-made or proportioned race, falling off most in the limbs, the torso being large, vast, and disproportioned. They are so described by Livy and have never altered. So on the first part, he says, Saxons are a tall, powerful, athletic race of men, the strongest as a race on the face of the earth. They have fair hair with blue eyes and so fine a complexion. Then, a few sentences later, he says, or a sentence later, actually, he says, generally speaking, they are not a well-made or proportioned race, falling off most in the limbs, the torso being large, vast, and disproportioned. He needs to make up his mind. Which one is it? Tell us what you really think. Under the influence of climate, the Saxon decays in Northern America and in Australia, and he rears his offspring with difficulty. But what do they always tell you? I'm talking to you, sisters and brothers. What are you always told? That sisters experience the most difficulty during childbirth, sometimes not making it all the way through childbirth. Why is that? Is that because some inherent issue with our people, the Americans, the American Indians having children? I don't think so. I think it's mostly because you're having children in the place where demons dwell, in the place where the Anglo-Saxon holds court. A stranger is the first one to touch your child. You go into a sterile environment with artificial lights. There is no soul. Under the influence of climate, the Saxon decays in Northern America. He decays. And in Australia, and he rears his offspring with difficulty. They have difficulty rearing offspring. They're not having so many. They always tell us that our people are the ones that are not having children. We've been a minority since they got here, right? We're the indigenous Americans. We're the only Americans there ever was, is, and will be. But yet We've always been, what, 13% of the population, right? Which means what? We've never had many children, right? Well, all you have to do is dig into your family's genealogy and look at how many children some of your second and third great grandparents were having. Yeah, they were having 8 on average. Why has that number changed? Propaganda has changed that number. And I'm not saying propaganda is so strong, it has changed that number to where now you have Americans, you have our people, the people that are falsely called Black Americans, but are really Americans, American Indians. You're told now, if you have a lot of children, oh, wow, you got how many kids? And now you wait to have children? Children aren't as important. You don't bring them up. You don't nurture and nourish them. Male and female, nurturing and nourishing their children when they are babies. You don't do that anymore. Some do. But others leave it up to the school to do that, to nurture and nourish / educate their children. And you take them to the school, you take them to the strangers early after you give birth. You hand them over to a stranger. So all these things, and then you go put your health in that Anglo-Saxon stranger's hand. And what do they do with it? They don't appreciate the fact that you've put your health in their hands, right? No, the statistic grows. That's all that happens. That sisters are having difficulty in childbirth. Why? Is it the so-called treatment that you get up until the point that you get where you give birth? Does it happen during? Does the malpractice happen during or after? Speaking about the Anglo-Saxon who decays in Northern America, he has changed his continental locality. A physiological law, I should shortly explain, is against his naturalization there. So, a real native permanent American or Australian race of pure Saxon blood is a dream which can never be realized. So they are going to decay as they have been. The Saxon is fair, not because he lives in a temperate or cold climate, but because he is a Saxon. The Eskimo are nearly black, yet they live amidst eternal snows. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? He says the Eskimo are nearly black. He didn't say the Eskimo are Negroes. He associated earlier the Negro with Africa, but yet here he says the Eskimo are nearly black, yet they live amidst eternal snows. Where are the Eskimos? Canada? Right? He didn't say anything about Africans. Climate has no influence in permanently altering the varieties of the races of men. Climate has no influence in permanently altering the varieties or races of men. Destroy them. It may and does, but it cannot convert them into any other race. I remember reading Anthony Browder years ago, and after reading it, thinking that everyone came out of Africa, and due to climatic changes, people went from black to brown to lighter brown to pale. Thoughtful, plodding, industrious beyond all other races, a lover of labor for labor's sake. Thoughtful, plodding, industrious beyond all other races, a lover of labor for labor's sake. He cares not its amount, if it be but profitable. Large-handed, mechanical, a lover of order, of punctuality in business, of neatness and cleanliness. So he's talking about the Anglo-Saxon, or what you term as a white person. He says he is a lover of labor for labor's sake. Work, 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 right? Why work so much? Why not just become self-sufficient? Why not be self-sufficient? Why not leave people alone? Why not leave people to their soil portions? Because the soil will provide what the people need. And then you won't have to work so much. You can fish and watch the sun set, and you can cook those fish right there on the shores. But no, work, work, work. And it says, a lover of order, punctuality in business, of neatness and cleanliness. I don't think of the cleanliness, that's a misnomer. There's a bunch of videos right now where so-called white people, or these people he's referring to as Anglo-Saxons, all said they were shocked to find out that American Indians, or the people you falsely call Black Americans, use rags when they shower or take a bath. Yeah, they use rags. They don't just use the bar soap. They use rags and loofahs and things like that. Yeah, and they wash their limbs too. They wash their limbs, their feet, their hands, everything. The Anglo-Saxon was shocked at this. One Anglo-Saxon said after hearing this, he went and bought him a rag, some microfiber rags. And it say he used them and it changed his life. Let's shake it. In these qualities, no race approaches him. I beg to differ. The wealthy with him is the soul respectable. The respectable, the soul good. The word comfort is never out of his mouth. It is the beau ideal of the Saxon. His genius is wholly applicative, for he invents nothing. In the fine arts and in music, taste cannot go lower. His genius is wholly applicative, for he invents nothing. In the fine arts and in music, taste cannot go lower. The race in general has no musical ear, and they mistake noise for music. Do you agree? Do you agree? That's a question. The marrow, bones, and cleaver belong to them. Prize fights, bull baiting with dogs, sparring matches, rowing, horse racing, gymnastics. The boar is peculiar to the Saxon race. When young, they cannot sit still an instant. So powerful is the desire for work, labor, excitement, muscular exertion. The self-esteem is so great, the self-confidence so matchless, that they cannot possibly imagine any man or set of men to be superior to themselves. Accumulative beyond all others, the wealth of the world collects in their hands. This book is published in 1862. So as you can see, nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is which part this installment is, which is the 15th installment of Black Americans Don't Have Culture. Thank you for stopping by. Hopefully you saw parts 1 through 14. Someone commented and said under one of the other installments, and they were pretty passionate about it. They said, Black Americans are the culture. Yeah, I don't think he saw the show or any of the shows, actually. I think he just read the title. Today and tomorrow is all the Saxon looks to. Yesterday he cares not for. So if he cares not for yesterday, why would he tell the truth about yesterday? Think about that. Why would the Saxon tell the truth about yesterday if he cares not for it? And we know he doesn't care about yesterday. And it's very clear. It is past and gone. He is the man of circumstances, of expediency without method. Try all things, but do not theorize. Give me constance, a book of constance. This is his cry. Hence, his contempt for men of science, his hatred for genius arises from another cause. He cannot endure the idea that any man is really superior in anything to himself. But of course, he just told us previously that the Saxon invents nothing. He cannot endure the idea that any man is really superior in anything to himself. The absence of genius in his race, he feels, he dislikes to be told it. He attempts to crush it wherever it appears. Men of genius he calls humbugs, impostors. His literature is peculiar to himself and must not be confounded with modern German literature. This latter is chiefly of Slavonian origin. Slavonian origin, mingled with the race occupying Central Europe and stretching into Flanders. And you send your children to be taught by the Saxon. And anyone who is not taught by the Saxon and does not pay for a degree, you consider them lower than you. You are quick to say that they are uneducated. Well, educate is synonymous with nurture and nourish. So you consider them unnurtured and nourished, and you are, O educated one, nurtured and nourished by strangers. All that is free in Saxon countries, the Saxons owe to themselves. Their laws, manners, institutions, they brought with them from the woods of Germany, and they have transferred them to the woods of America after they cut the woods down and are continuing to cut the woods down, right? They owe nothing to any kings or princes or chiefs. Originally, they had neither chief nor king. A general in war was elected when required. In their ideas of property in land, they differ also from other races. They do not admit that any class or family, dynasty, or individual can appropriate himself and to his hereditary heirs any portion of the earth's surface. In their ideas of property in land, they differ also from other races. They do not admit that any class or family, dynasty, or individual can appropriate himself and to his hereditary heirs any portion of Earth's surface. This is why they think your stuff belongs to them. I see not how they could originate any but the lowest forms of civilization, such as I have seen in southern Africa amongst the Dutch, that is, Saxon, Boers, and such as I have heard prevails in the far west. At the third generation, the Saxon Boer in a remote land sinks nearly to the barbarian, active and energetic, no doubt, still a Saxon, but not the less a Boer and a vulgar barbarian. Now you understand what the indigenous South Africans are saying and why they act the way they act. They have a reason. Should it ever happen, says the immortal historian, whom I quote from recollection, that in Europe brutal military despots should succeed in extinguishing the liberties of men, threatening with the same unhappy fate the inhabitants of this island, England, they, mindful of their Saxon origin, would doubtless escape across the ocean, carrying to a new world their institutions, religion, and laws. I once said to a gentleman born in Mexico, "Who are the Mexicans?" I put the same question to a gentleman from Peru, as I had done before to persons calling themselves Germans. Neither could give a distinct reply to the question. The fact turns out to be that there really are no such persons, no such race. When the best blood of Spain migrated to America, they killed as many of the natives, that is, the copper colored Indians indigenous to the soil, as they could. But they didn't get us all. And they didn't get all the people who are indigenous to the place that is termed Mexico. You just don't see those people on the news. You don't see those people on videos. But when you do, you say, hey, that could be my cousin. That could be my auntie. That could be my uncle. But this could not go on. Laborers to till the soil being required. The old Spaniard was found unequal to this. He could not colonize the conquered country. He required other aid, native or imported. Then came the admixture with the Indian blood and the Celt Iberian blood. The produce being the mulatto. But now that the supplies of Spanish blood have ceased, the mulatto must cease too. For as a hybrid, he becomes a non-productive after a time. If he intermarries only with the mulatto, he can no longer go back to the Spanish blood. That stock has ceased. Of necessity, then, he is forced upon the Indian breed. Thus, year by year, The Spanish blood disappears, and with it the mulatto, and the population retrograding toward the indigenous inhabitants returns to that Indian population, the hereditary descendants of those whom Cortés found there, whom nature seemingly placed there. Not aliens, not foreigners, but aboriginal. As it is with Mexico, so it is with Peru. Let us attend now to the greatest of all experiments ever made in respect of the transfer of a population indigenous to one continent and attempting by immigration to take possession of another, to cultivate it with their own hands, to colonize it, to persuade the world in time that they are the natives of the newly occupied land. Northern America and Australia furnished the fields for this, the greatest of experiments. Already has the horse, the sheep, the ox become as it were indigenous to these lands. Nature did not place them there at first, yet they seem to thrive and flourish and multiply exceedingly. Yet, even as regards these domestic animals, we cannot be quite certain. Will they eventually be self-supporting? Will they supplant the llamas, the kangaroo, the buffalo? Or, in order to effect this, will they require to be constantly renovated from Europe? If this be the contingency, then the acclimation is not perfect. How is it with man himself? The man planted there by nature, the red Indian, differs from all other on the face of the earth. Now, if you've watched my shows, you have seen me show pictures of people and animals when they are considered red, okay? Similar to copper colored is what is meant by red Indian, copper colored Indian. When speaking of a red Indian, we are not speaking of an Anglo-Saxon with a pink neck and rosy cheeks. We are not speaking of a human the same color as a fire engine. Okay? We are speaking of something along the lines of chestnut, of copper. The red Indian differs from all other on the face of the earth, and so do you. No one on the face of the earth looks like you and your family. And always remember that any of the explorers, any of the foreigners, including the author of this book, they only see the people that they see, and they described those who they see, okay? They don't see every member of your family. They don't see every member of my family, okay? Because they would see that we are all different complexions. He gives way before the European races, the Saxon and the Celtic, the Celt Iberian and Lusitanian in the south, the Celt and Saxon in the north. Of the tropical regions of the New World, I need not speak. Everyone knows that none but those whom nature placed there can live there. You need your home, and your home needs you. It's not just because we want you to pack up your people and go home. It's because you sprouted from that place. and it needs you and you need it. All you got to do is go lay on the beach and your skin start bubbling up. That ain't normal. It's not natural. Why would land in the subtropical atmosphere, Mississippi or Bama, get your skin to percolating? Of the tropical regions of the New World, I need not speak. Everyone knows that none but those whom nature placed there can live there, that no Europeans can colonize a tropical country. But may there not be some doubts of their self-support in milder regions? Take the northern states themselves. There the Saxon and the Celt seem to thrive beyond all that is recorded in history. But are we quite sure that this success is fated to be permanent? Annually from Europe is poured 100,000 men and women of the best blood of the Scandinavian, and twice that number of pure Celt. And so long as this continues, he is sure to thrive. So every year, thousands of Scandinavian and Celts, Anglo-Saxon, or the people you term as white, come here to our shores. But check it. Arrest is suddenly, as in the case of Mexico and Peru, throw the onus of reproduction upon the population no longer European but native or born on the spot. Then will come the struggle between the European alien and his adopted fatherland. I bet you never heard that before, have you? You ain't never heard European alien, right? Yeah, they trying to send all the people who cross them imaginary lines on the map back, which, hey, I'm not here to talk about whether that's bad or good. Stop taking money out my check, then I wouldn't care, but I'm not here to talk about whether it's bad or good. I'm here to talk about everybody who need to go home. You never heard the European alien and his adopted fatherland, the climate, the forest, the remains of the Aborigines not yet extinct. Last, not least, that unknown and mysterious degradation of life and energy which in ancient times seems to have decided the fate of all the Phoenician, Grecian, and Coptic colonies. Cut off from their original stock, they gradually withered and faded and finally died away. The Phoenician never became acclimatized in Africa, nor in Cornwall, nor in Wales. Vestiges of his race, it is true, still remain, but they are mere vestiges. Peru and Mexico are fast retrograding to their primitive condition. May not the northern states, under similar circumstances, do the same? Do you hear him? 13% of the population? You heard that? 13% of the population? That 13% of the population remind me of our people been endured slavery for 400 years. That's the same type of thing to me, you know? Numbers that just don't change, right? Already, the United States man differs in appearance from the European. The ladies early lose their teeth. In both sexes, the adipose cellular cushion interposed between the skin and the aponeurosis and muscles disappears, or at least loses its adipose portion. The muscles become stringy and show themselves. The tendons appear on the surface. symptoms of premature decay manifest themselves. Damn, homies just say they deteriorating. They're decaying from the inside out. Now, what do these signs, added to the uncertainty of infant life in the southern states and the smallness of their families in the northern, indicate? Not the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon into the Red Indian, but warnings that the climate has not been made for him, nor he for the climate. And for all you people who think when he's speaking of the Red Indian, he is speaking of the Native American, go down the YouTube tunnel and go check out some Native Americans. And you tell me if they were made for this climate. They was made for Mississippi. They was made for Alabama, Florida, Louisiana. They was made for that. Where are they? On land that was designated for them? Well, you would be too. If you had some land that was designated for you and you lived there, you would be there too, right? That don't mean that that place was made for you. That just means that it economically makes sense. See what even a small amount of insulation has done for the French Celt in Lower Canada. Look at the race there. Small men, small horses, small cattle, still smaller carts. Ideas smallest of all. He is not even the Celt of modern France. He is the French Celt of the Regency, the thing of Louis XIII. Stationary, absolutely stationary. His numbers, I believe, depend on the occasional admixture of fresh blood from Europe. He has increased to about 1 million since his first settlement in Canada, but much of this has come from Britain and not from France. Give us the statistics of the original families who keep themselves apart from the fresh blood imported into the province. Let us have the real and solid increase of the original habitants, as they are pleased to call themselves, and then we may calculate on the result. Had the colony been left to itself, cut off from Europe for a century or two, it is my belief that the forest, the buffalo, the wild, and the Red Indian would have pushed him into the St. Lawrence, from the banks of which he never had the courage to wander far. Amalgamating readily with the Red Indian by intermarriage, for the Celt has not that antipathy to the dark races which so peculiarly characterize the Saxon. Amalgamating with the Red Indian, the population would speedily have assumed the appearance it has in Mexico and Peru. To follow the same fate, perish or return to the original Indian, and finally to terminate in the all but utter destruction of the original race itself. It has been asserted of the West Indian Creole, of the Mexican, Peruvian, and Chilean Creole, and of the North American or Saxon Creole, now called a United States man, but the pretended changes we shall find are either trifling or not permanent, or do not exist. The earth was made for man, and man was made for earth. Your home was made for you, and you were made for your home. Go home. Can any race of men live and thrive in any climate? Need I discuss this question seriously? Will anyone venture to affirm it of man? Travel to the Antilles and see the European struggling with existence, a prey to fever and dysentery, unequal to all labor, wasted and wan, finally perishing and becoming rapidly extinct as a race, but for the constant influx of fresh European blood. European inhabitants of Jamaica, of Cuba, of Cuba, of Hispaniola, and of the Windward and Leeward Islands, what progress have you made since your first establishment there? Can you say you are established? Cease importing fresh European blood and watch the results. Labor you cannot, hence the necessity for a black population. Your pale, wan, and sickly offspring would in half a century be non-productive. Face to face with the energetic Negro race, your color must alter. First brown, then black. Look at Haiti. With the deepening color vanishes civilization. Yep. Civilization is not always a good thing. We were doing just fine here before the civilization landed on our shores, right? Before the religion of death, the boy lovers reached our shores, right? The European then cannot colonize a tropical country. He cannot identify himself with it. Hold it he may with the sword, as we hold India or Hindustan, and as Spain once held Central America, but inhabitants of it, in the strict sense of the term, they cannot become. Withdraw from a tropical country the annual fresh influx of European blood, and in a century its European inhabitants cease to exist. Who are the Mexicans, the Peruvians, the Chileans, the Argentinians, the Brazilians? Whence do they spring? And what are the vital forces supplying their population? Applying the physiological laws which seem to me sufficiently well ascertained, I had little difficulty in arriving at the following results. Man has found it difficult to destroy a race of man, nor do I think that he has yet succeeded even in this. Still, it is a possible event, apparently, but he has not yet succeeded in effecting it. Okay? So when you think of yourself as the American, the only American there ever was, is, and will be, the American Indian, the American falsely called the Black American, there is no such thing as a black human. When you think of yourself as almost extinct because foreigners came here and started mating with your ancestors, don't that irk you? It irked me. For the life of me, I can't understand why some of our people growing up where we grew up, growing up in the places that we grew up, think that another group of people move into your neighborhood and just, the women and the men, they just start mating with everybody. To create a race of men or animals is entirely beyond his power. A Mexican nation may be formed by a protocol, a treaty, a victory. An illustrious robber may found a nation. An iron despot may chain together the free Saxon and the Slavish Pruss. Another may yoke in common change the Slavonian and the German, the Italian, and the Hun. But will such things have a permanence? Consult history, and you will find that it cannot be. Still less can any power create a Mexican or a Peruvian people or race. Look at the elements of Mr. Canning's free states, analyze them, try them by any of the physiological laws I have spoken of, and observe the result. A Celt Iberian and Lusitanian population make a descent on America. Old Spain and Portugal send forth their immigrants. Men of a race already decaying, men of a province of Rome, an offset of Carthage, a combination of races themselves in decay and tottering to their fall. These, under some bold leader, seize on Southern and Central America, consolidate their power as masters, and enter in absolute possession of the soil. One half of vast continent becomes thus a mere province of two paltry European states. During this period of 300 years, so ask yourself, if these two places are struggling, stop struggling. If these two places are struggling at home and they come here and they can't survive, who's going to wind up taking possession of their home? During this period of 300 years, all things were favorable for an absolute consolidation with Spain and Portugal, undisturbed possession, peace, continual immigration, wealth. Where are they now? When the act of separation from the so-called mother country took place, the population of Mexico and Peru consisted of 1. Pure Spaniards, whether European or Creole, it matters not. 2. Pure Indians, that is, the original and only true American, the native. 3. A motley crew composed of a mixture of these more or less tinged. 4. A sprinkling of Negro blood, pure or mixed with the Indian and European. By the act of disunion, the influx of European blood, by which alone the pure race could be maintained against climate and against the continual aggression of the other more numerous races, was suddenly withdrawn. Even now it rapidly disappears, and in a century it will have become extinct. For in these climates a European race cannot labor, cannot appropriate the soil to themselves, cannot multiply their offspring. But secondly, with the cessation of the supply of European blood, the mulatto of all shades must also cease. He cannot extend his race, for he is of no race. There is no place for him in nature. So soon as he has no longer the pure blood of some other race to intermingle with, he ceases to be, receding toward the black or advancing to the white. And we know there is no such thing as a black human or a white human. And mind you, when I'm reading this, when we're going through these materials, understand you would have to go to these places. You would have to go to these places. You would have to stay at these places, communicate with the people, look at the people, learn who the people are. Because just reading a book is this author's interpretation of what's happening at the time when he published this book or when he wrote this book. I don't know how much this author traveled. Pretty sure you can look up this guy and find out how traveled he is. It does say that he's an MD, so I guess he was making a couple dollars. So yeah, you got to go to these places and see the people. Not that I'm going, I don't care about seeing them people. I just want to be left alone, you know? Again, I say all that to say, never get caught up in this romantic tale or any of the romantic tales. There is something to learn from other people's perspective on certain matters. And I might add that it's quite interesting. So soon as he has no longer the pure blood of some other race to intermingle with, he ceases to be, recedes toward the black, or advances toward the white, as the case may be. Thus, the population I speak of, lost by Mr. Canning's act, or will lose in time the mainspring of their population, falling back on the native, that is, the American Indian. Now, it would be so much easier if he referred to the Americans as the American Indians from this point moving forward. And he referred to the people of Africa, the place that is termed Africa, as those people specific to wherever they are from, as well as like how specific he is with the Scandinavian, the Anglo-Saxon, the Celt, the Iberian. He's very specific. But when he speaks of the American Indian, he speaks of the Red Indian. I'm sure he just spoke of receding toward the black. Okay. So if he can speak when he refers to our people, if he can just say the American Indian, we would know that he's talking about Americans. The race implanted there by nature, that is, the American Indian, your family, your people, the race implanted there by nature. Why you think they had to start, the propaganda had to start moving toward calling your natural hair that grows out of your head a afro instead of what it really is, which is a natural? The race in unison with the forest and the climate, the soil, the air, the place. The race of whose origin man knows nothing, and more than he does of the llama and the tapir, the cavia and the condor, the vegetable and the animal world of that continent on which Columbus gazed with such delight. All these he found distinct from the rest of the world. All these he found distinct from the rest of the world. He's speaking of Columbus. He found America distinct from the rest of the world, which means what? Which means he saw the rest of the world, which means he saw Hindustan, right? Right? Which means he didn't think this was Hindustan. They often tell you he got lost. He thought this was India. Well, it was America, India. Hence, the people, American Indians. All these he found distinct from the rest of the world, and so was the American man from his fellow man. As different as is the Nandu from the ostrich, the llama from the camel. The man of the United States who as yet delights in no name might have walked into the land without any interruption or hindrance from any race. The man of the United States, not to be confused with America. The United States Company. Penetrating to the center of the so-called empire, he might have once more seen the sacrificial fires kindled on the pyramids of Cholula. A native population of nearly pure Indian would once more have regained its ascendancy to perish ultimately, to return to the nothing out of which they came. But now the Saxon, grasping at more wealth, more lands, comes in as a new element upon the already effete creations of Canning. Will he fare better? Will he be able to extinguish a race, the Indian of South America, and put himself in its place? I believe not. In that climate, at least. Will he succeed even in North America? Is the boasted union to be permanent? The pettifogging politicians of the day say seriously and gravely that in their opinions it must come to a monarchy at last. Profound politicians. A half dozen monarchies at last, a king of New York, a Leopold installed in Kentucky, an Otho in Michigan, a liberal despotism under a prince of the noble house of Brunswick or Brandenburg. But you forget that these people are Saxons, Democrats by their nature. And so are you. Maybe. You? Democrat? As the southern states of America become depopulated by the operation of the physiological laws laid down, that vast land will fall an easy prey to the Saxon and Celtic races now occupying the northern states. That they will ultimately seize on them, there cannot be a doubt, driving before them the expiring remains of native and Lusitanian, Celt, Iberian, and mulatto, a worthless race of fet, exhausted before even Hannibal and a handful of Carthaginians held the country from which they sprung as a mere appendage of Carthage. A single Roman legion was enough for old Spain. It could hold it yet. The United States men, the descendants of Anglo-Saxons, the Fleming and the Celt, with the sprinkling of South and Middle German, are now in possession of North America. It seems to be absolutely theirs. They form a union. They begin to talk of natives and foreigners. They have forgotten who they are and fancy themselves Americans because they choose to call themselves so, just as our West India planters might have assumed the name and title of native true-born Caribs. The United States man believes himself to be independent of Europe, by which, if he means anything, he must mean independent of the race or races from which he sprang or sprung. The chronicles called histories tells us that the Roman Empire extended from the Clyde and Forth to the Tigris and Euphrates. Roman Empire extended from the Clyde and Forth to the Tigris and Euphrates. Northern extratropical Africa was said to be thoroughly Roman. Italy, of course, was Roman to the core. Where are the Romans now? What races have they destroyed? What races have they supplanted? For 14 centuries, they lorded it over the semi-civilized world, and now they are of no more note than the ancient Scythians or Mongols, Copts or Tartars. They established themselves nowhere as Romans. Perhaps they never were a race at all. But be this as it may, they destroyed no other race, supplanted no other race, and now look over the map of their empire and tell me where you find a physical vestige of the race. I shall speak hereafter the most remarkable being, the asserted identity of the Red Indian. This is a picture of the Aboriginal native of Australia, not to be confused with the words that I am reading right now. I shall speak hereafter the most remarkable being, the asserted identity of the Red Indian throughout the entire range of continental America. In the Antilles, the Celtic race failed. Napoleon himself never ventured to renew the hopeless struggle with climate and the Negro race. Spanish America is at an end. Our West Indian colonies are no colonies. Everyone knows this now. And if there be any who believe that the European races now occupying Florida and the countries bordering on the Gulf of Mexico can colonize and supplant the colored races, they will, I think, find themselves in error. It's coming, y'all. It's coming, everybody. Open your eyes. Believe what your eyes see. It would appear that, but for fresh supplies of immigrants from the parent stock living on the parent soil of France, the Canadian Frenchmen must gradually have become extinct. Had they been placed face to face with a more energetic race than the Red Indian, then rapid extinction was most certain. Let me conclude this section by an examination of the pretensions of another race. Of all others, the most outrageously boasting, arrogant, self-sufficient, beyond endurance, holding in utter contempt all other races and all other men. The Saxon, or the one you term as white people. Let us follow the Saxon across the Atlantic, trace him to Northern America, to the Cape, to Australia, first to Northern America, where Celt and Saxon, for both assisted, have no doubt founded a colony to which the annals of mankind afford no parallel. A mighty forest extending from sea to man seemingly boundless, a new vegetable and animal world, another climate, another continent, another soil. These suffice for the existence of a native Red Indian, the man of the woods, the American. In fact, he perishes from famine and wars, but seemingly not from disease. For first Spain thought so, and where is she now? Where is the boasted empire of the Indies? The native races are not yet extinct. In the southern states, there is a Negro population who may one day be masters. Remember Saint Domingo? Year after year, day almost by day, the best blood of England and Ireland is poured into the great American colony, from Nouvelle Orleans to Montreal. So he says up here, he says, the native races are not yet extinct. In the southern states, there is a Negro population who may one day be masters. So he associates the American Indian with Negro. See? Even he don't fail to confuse. The so-called ancient races first merit our attention, some of these called white or fair, Caucasian by courtesy. The Jew, the Gypsy, the Copt, the Hindu. Okay? The one that they call India now is properly Hindustan, and that's the Hindu. Okay? No, Columbus wasn't lost. He knew he was in America, India. A gentleman to whom a portion of this valley belonged, returning from India, as I was informed, brought with him 2 servant men of a dark race, not Negroes, but of a meek African look and bronze color. These men settled in this valley, and they married 2 Saxon women. Of these 2, one only had a family who, marrying other Scotch Saxons, gave rise to several families of mulattoes, more or less deeply colored. In one instance, 2 mulattoes had married, and they also had a family, but I do not believe that any mulatto race can be maintained beyond the 3rd or 4th generations by mulattoes merely. They must intermarry with the pure races or perish. Nature creates no mules, nor will she tolerate them. This point we shall illustrate when speaking of the Peruvians and Mexicans. Okay. All this was reserved for a higher philosophy and for minds of a more original cast. He neither admitted nor denied the unity of men. To me, the unity of men appears evident, but if so, whence come the dark races? And why is it that destiny to seem to have marked them for destruction? It is in America, the last discovered by the civilized European, where we find the stronghold of the colored race. Are you confused yet? Because I am. We all know black, colored, Negro, African American, mulatto. We all know these terms that are used for us Americans, the only Americans there ever was, is, and will be. But just in reading this material, how many different designations has this author given to not just us, but others as well? I'm confused. Maybe he's trying to confuse me. Maybe not. But see, there's one thing that can't be confused, and that's reality. And that's the truth. And we were all given natural senses to be able to know truth when we sense it. It's natural. It is in America. Listen, it is in America, the last discovered by the civilized European, where we find the stronghold of the colored race, where we find meaning the colored race was already here. And who is known as colored in America? You look on your great grandmothers, or at least I look on my great grandmother's. I look on my grandmother's birth certificate, and her mother is marked as colored. But there's a stamp on top of the colored, a small stamp. And it's the stamp is the word black. It's stamped on. It's stamped over the written word colored. It is in America, the last discovered by the civilized. Remember, this ain't a debate. This ain't a debate. See, I'm not the one who said it. I just wrote it as the title, Black Americans Don't Have Culture. I'm not the one who said it. I'm not the one who think it. It is in America, the last discovered by the civilized Europeans, where we find the stronghold of the colored race, not the Native American race, the colored race. From the land of fire to the ice-bound polar sea, nature has darkened every race unmistakably. Oh, he rhyming now. He hip-hop. Nor had the Eskimo or circumpolar races escaped the coloration. Nor had the Eskimo in Alaska and Canada or circumpolar races escaped the coloration. Okay? The popes of Rome sanctified the atrocities. It was the old tragedy again. The fair races of men against the dark races. The popes of Rome. Can you say dumb verses? The popes of Rome sanctified the atrocities. It was the old tragedy again. The fair races of men against the dark races. I mean, who else would put fluoride and chlorine in your water, right? When your creeks had sweet water in them. See how a company of London merchants lord it over 100 millions of colored men in Hindostan. The Indian Empire, as we call it, having turned out so profitable an investment for British capital, although for obvious reasons it never can become a permanent colony of England, suggested to the office the idea of founding a similar empire in the heart of Africa. Everything seemed favorable for the enterprise. Southern Africa had long been ours. The southern extratropical part, partly held nominally by the Portuguese, that is, as good as not held at all, a wide desert separating Central Africa from the Moroccan, from the Celt in Algiers, and from the present Egyptian ruler. Central Africa full of wealth, a productive soil, and a feeble black population. Nothing could be more favorable, and I have not the smallest doubt that the officials at the colonial office already contemplated another India in Central Africa. The wealth, the product of the labor of many millions of Africans, in reality slaves, as the natives of Hindostan, but held to be free by a legal fiction, might be poured into the coffers of the office. A legal fiction. Yeah, that's what they do. Legal fictions and delusions. But who are the dark races of ancient and modern times? The American Indian and Eskimo. The Saxon will not mingle with any dark race, nor will he allow him to hold an acre of land in the country occupied by him. Whoa! The Saxon will not mingle with any dark race. He has started to, and he has been for a while. Nor will he allow him to hold an acre of land in the country occupied by him. They try not to. This, at least, is the law of Anglo-Saxon America. The fate, then, of the Mexicans, Peruvians, and Chileans is in no shape doubtful. But what were the race or races of men and of animals he found there in America? Were they the same, or did they resemble in any way the men and animals they had left in Fatherland, in beloved Holland? Not in the least. Neither men nor animals bore any resemblance of those in Europe. The races of men they found encountered, he's talking about in the place that is termed Africa, not America. The races of men they first encountered were the Hottentots and Bosjamen, the yellow race or races of Africa. The yellow race or races of Africa. The former word of doubtful origin expresses the taller and stronger tribes, tribes which were armed with the assegai, held flocks of sheep and cattle, but no horses. The term Bosjaman simply means the man of the bush. By Bosjaman, then, we further understand that section of the yellow race, smaller in stature than those called Hottentots, less civilized, if such a term can possibly be used or misapplied, living without flocks or herds, huts or tents, employing the bow and poisoned arrow, children of the desert. Our present business is with the primitive race, the Aborigines, as they are called, of southern Africa, called by the Dutch some 300 years ago Hottentots and Boschemen, names unknown in the language of the race, for they call themselves Otnikas, Quaikos, etc. Did the Dutch, the Christian Dutch, consider these races to be men or women? I scarcely think so. True, they held as a theory that all men and women came from one pair, like all cows and pigs and sheep. But this was a mere theory. In practice, they held them to be a something different. The colored men the Dutch called boys, and the colored women they called maids. It said the colored men the Dutch called boys, and the colored women they called maids. So they're calling these people, these Boschemen and Hottentots, and they're calling them colored. So I'm gonna assume at this point that there are Anglo-Saxons who are termed white people, and everyone else is colored, is Negro. Everyone else. And speaking of the persons composing a commando, for example, they would say that there were on it 30 men, meaning Dutchmen, and 50 boys, meaning black men. See, now he says black. So black, colored, Negro, all these terms are for people that aren't Anglo-Saxon or white or European or pale, I should say, or as they say, fair. Right? I have said that when the Dutch first landed at the Cape of Good Hope, they met with the race called Hottentots, a simple, feeble race of men, living in little groups, almost indeed in families, tending their fat-tailed sheep and dreaming away their lives, which sounds amazing. See? You heard him say that the Anglo-Saxon likes to work for work's sake. Everything is about a profit. Commerce. As you can see, they said the Hottentots, a simple, feeble race of men living in little groups, almost indeed in families, tending their fat-tailed sheep and dreaming away their lives, meaning they do what they have to do and then they don't do anything. It's no need to do anything. Now you can just enjoy life. This is a foreign concept to the Anglo-Saxon. Of a dirty yellow color, they're speaking of the Hottentots. They slightly resemble the Chinese, but are clearly of a different blood. The face is set on like a baboon's. Cranium small but good, jaws very large, feet and hands small, eyes linear in form and of great power. Forms generally handsome, hideous when old, and never pretty. Lazier than an Irish woman, which is saying much, and of a blood different and totally distinct from all the rest of the world. The women are not made like other women. Tiedemann says that the two hemispheres of the brain are nearly symmetrical. Though small in stature, they are taller than their cognate race, the Boschemen. These I take to be nearly allied to the Hottentot, though different in a good many respects. They have the physical qualities of the Hottentot, but exaggerated. They are still shorter in stature, having no measurements on which I can depend. I often merely, as a conjecture, the average height of the male and female Boschman, say 4 feet 6 inches for the male and 4 feet for the female. Their power of sight is incredible, and this, with all other peculiarities, disappears with the single crossing of the breed. He says their power of sight is incredible, as if he is looking through their eyes. Unbelievable. The Kafirs are closely allied to the Negro race. Who is this Negro race he speaks of? The Kafirs are closely allied to the Negro race. He's speaking of the Negro race as if Negro comes from a place of the same name, and probably graduate, as it were, into them. For as nature has formed many races of white men whose physical organization and mental disposition differ widely from each other, so also has she formed the swarthy world. Swarthy world. Remember they called Abraham Lincoln swarthy. He called himself swarthy, I believe, but that's another story. It is not necessary, neither perhaps is it at all correct to call a Kafir a Negro or a Negro a Kafir. Neither are the Kafirs degenerated Bedouins, nor well-fed Hottentots, nor Saxon turned black by the sun, nor Arabs, nor Carthaginians. When the Negro is crossed with the Hottentot race, the product is a mild-tempered, industrious person. He's describing it like if he's breeding dogs or something. He say when it's crossed with them, it's mild-tempered. You know, he got this kind of gait. You know what I mean? His legs are built like this. It's crazy. When the Negro is crossed with the Hottentot, Negro, see, I got to find out. I'm trying to figure out who is he referring to, because he said the Negroes of the South in North America, of the southern states in North America. Then he says the Negroes of another part of Africa. When the Negro is crossed with the Hottentot race, the product is a mild-tempered, industrious person. When with the white race, the result is a scoundrel. But cross as you will, the mulatto cannot hold his ground as a mulatto. Back the breed will go to one or other of the pure breeds, white or black. I have already explained all this. Oh, here we go. Okay. And now for the Negro and Negro land, Central Africa, as yet untrodden and unknown. So 1862, he's speaking of Negro land. And when he's speaking of a Negro, he's speaking of a Negro from a place called Negro land. I've seen this place on a map before, but never really got into it or read about it or whatever. And he says it is Central Africa, as yet untrodden and unknown. Look at the Negro, so well known to you, and say, need I describe him? Is he shaped like any white person? Is the anatomy of his frame, of his muscles or organs like ours? What are you going to do? Cut him open? Do surgery on him? That's what they doing now, right? That's why sisters have trouble in childbirth, right? Because you cutting on them. Does he walk like us? Think like us, act like us? Who is us? I guess he's an Anglo-Saxon. Not in the least. What an innate hatred the Saxon has for him, and how I have laughed at the mock philanthropy of England. The mock philanthropy of England. Right. They're going to force their help on somebody. Them people over there just want to be left alone. But I have spoken of this already, and it is a painful topic. And yet, This despised race drove the warlike French from St. Domingo, and the issue of a struggle with them in Jamaica might be doubtful. But come it will, and then the courage of the Negro will be tried against England. Already they defeated France, but after all, was it not the climate for that anybody of dark men in this world will ever fight successfully a French army of 20,000 men, I never shall believe. With 1,000 white men, all the blacks of St. Domingo could be defeated in a single action. This is my opinion of the dark races. The Negro race occupies Central Africa, extending from the Kalahari to the confines of the Sahara. Other races of men occupy the remainder, the Mauritanian or Moor, and the Kabils, the race probably which the Phoenicians found there on their first settlement. But the Moor is probably not indigenous. Though of vast and unknown antiquity, so also is the Copt. Who the Abyssinians and the Zulus are, it seems almost impossible to say, seeming that from Bruck to Harris, African travelers have either started mad or returned mad, the heat of the climate no doubt affecting their brains. Is the Negro race confined to Central Africa? It would seem not. Report describes their presence in Madagascar and even in Borneo, Sumatra, and some other eastern isles. The Australians are black, but they are not Negroes. American races. The discovery of a new world by Columbus is the most remarkable event in human history. Think about that. Have y'all ever thought about this statement right here? You've heard this statement about Columbus discovering the new world, a new world, it says, a new world. It wasn't new, it was new to him. Think about this. The discovery of a new world by Columbus is the most remarkable event in human history. Why? Because they saw you. Go ahead. You can feel yourself. You can feel yourself. Go on. Take a bow. Take a bow. Take a bow. Imagine a laugh track right now. Take a bow. Go ahead. I just don't do the bells and whistle, but imagine a laugh track. Applause track. The discovery of a new world by Columbus is the most remarkable event in human history. Why? Because he saw you. Think about that. Yeah. That land where the greatest of all experiments to be solved alone by time is now progressing, namely the practicability of self-government or democracy. You know, the Anglo-Saxon democracy, hand in hand. That land where liberty, driven from Europe, Asia, and Africa by whiskered dragoons and church militants, found that sure resting place, that fulcrum with which she may perhaps one day upturn the strongholds of fanaticism and violence, that land which first of all brought out the true character of the Saxon race, of the Saxon mind. In fact, in that land, Columbus and his followers, most of whom were men of great ability, though he alone had genius, in that land, these great men found nothing to resemble strictly the countries they had left, nor trees, nor shrubs, nor fish, nor fowl. Nothing which lived resembled what they had previously seen. Remember, the Europeans already explored the world before they explored our world. And did you hear what they said at the top? That land where liberty, driven from Europe, Asia, and Africa, Afro-Eurasia, by whiskered dragoons and church militants, found that sure resting place. I had better say nothing was identical with the productions of the old world. Man, so it's fair to say that the old world that they're speaking of is Afro-Eurasia, Africa, Asia, and Europe. That's the old world. In his bodily and mental qualities, he differed widely from all others. The American, you, your people, our people. That the New World was an erroneous phrase, seeing that it was a very old world in every sense of the word, that the copper-colored race of America, we ain't gonna go into copper-colored and all that. We past that. We should be past that. You should already know what copper look like. You should already know what all the shades of copper look like. And you should also understand that when someone is describing the people of a place, they are only describing the people they came in contact with. They not describing the people who was at the flat, in the crib. They not describing the people who wasn't around them, who wasn't nice to them. That the New World was an erroneous place, seeing that it was a very old world in every sense of the word, that the copper-colored race of America, that race which extended throughout the length and breadth of the land, were neither metamorphosed, Welshmen, nor Connaught men, nor Norwegians, nor even Polynesians. The last hypothesis, I believe, offered the credulous for the peopling of America, always accepting that standby of the thoroughbred theorists, namely that the Copper Indians, that is, the true Americans, were the lost tribes of Israel, who fled there on rafts, headed, I suppose, by Prester John. Let us leave such sickening, silly follies to their inventors and to those who hate truth. The romanticist, the novelist, the tourist, and proceed with our inquiry. This simple fact, for it is one, roused the wrath of an Anglo-Saxon now settled in that country, but calling himself an American. An Anglo-Saxon now settled in that country, calling himself you, even using your name, your surname, your first name, and got you thinking that you got your name from him. Let's shake it. The American human animal is one which seemingly cannot be domesticated, cannot be civilized. He is the man of the woods, differing from all other men. That's why they want to come here and see you. You can't be domesticated. You see that every day. You the one examined, you the one always talked about, you the one always causing problems. You and your woman, the male and the female, are both problems. He is the man of the woods, and she is the woman of the woods, differing from all other men and women. I gotta insert the woman, because you know the Anglo-Saxon It's something about them where they just obsessed with the man. I allude more especially to the race known by the name of red or copper colored Indians, extending, as it would seem, from Nootka Sound and the borders of the Arctic Circle to the rock-bound shores of the Land of Fire, including probably all the West India Islands, the tribes of Brazil, and the Caribs. To the north, we are certain that the Eskimo differ essentially from the Red Indian. And in the south, it is probable that the miserable dark-colored population wandering on the outskirts of the Land of Fire are not Red Indians, but a race analogous to the Australians and to the former inhabitants of Vandeman's Land. Polar or Arctic races of men, dark in color, swarthy, peculiar. I speak particularly of the Eskimo. Thus, in America, the races darken as we approach the poles. The eternal snows which ought to have whitened them, according to the theorists from Hippocrates to Barton Smith, have failed to bleach them. Let me speak first of the Red Indian, and next of the two other races, that is, if the southern one be a distinct race, which has not yet been proved. When the European races within the well-authenticated historic period discovered America, they found in its tropical portions organized kingdoms or empires, arts tolerably advanced, and an appearance of domesticity. I must decline entering into any controversy with those who derive them from the Welsh or Danes or Mongols or Asiatics or Malays, or even from the 10 tribes headed by Prester John. These are old women's fables, not worth a moment's consideration. The original population of Mexico was Indian. Of the remaining original races of America, I need say but little. The southern race is but imperfectly known to us. The northern or Eskimo have been long before the public, yet their real history is still to write. This is my opinion. And now of the insular part of the New World, one great section, Haiti, has shown the white man that he cannot colonize a tropical country. It must revert to those races on whom nature has bestowed a constitution adapted to labor under a tropical sun. Cuba and Jamaica will follow. They will become black spots in the history of civilization, for nothing in the history of mankind permits us to believe in the perfect civilization of the Negro race. See how he mentions Negro. He calls the people Negro. And again, I think this is strictly by complexion, by facial features, attitude, or something similar. Because he just told us, the author just told us that Negroes were from Negro land or Central Africa. And they were distinct even from the Australians, the Aborigines of Australia. So, yes, this is confusing, but we're going to try to sort it out. The policy of European races would be to expel the Negro and transplant the coolies, Hindus, Chinese, or other feeble races as laborers and workmen, bondmen, in fact. Coolies, people from Hindustan, Hindus, Chinese, Chinos, Native Americans, Why not call everything by its right name? Over these, the Saxon and Celt might lord it, as we do in India, with a few European bayonets, levying taxes and land rent, holding a monopoly of trade, furnishing them with salt at 50 times its value. But we cannot do this with the true Negro. See? This true Negro thing. I think this is just meaning dark people, dark skinned people, dark brown people, or I think it has more to do with an attitude. I'm not sure. It's a curious thing for sure. But the European has, in my opinion, erred in despising the Negro. I think the Negro is anything other than the European or anything other than the Anglo-Saxon, who seems to me of a race of occasionally great energy. Amongst them, we find the athletic. We find the athlete as finely marked to the waist as the Farnese Hercules. Most dark races are without any ear for music. Whoa, 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 whoa. He lost me right there. Most dark races are without any ear for music. Yet the Negro seems to have some sensibilities on this point. He is certainly at least equal to the Dutchman and perhaps to the very best of the Saxon race. So he's equal to the Dutchman and perhaps the very best of the Saxon race. Is he shitting on us or giving us compliments? But the grand qualities which distinguish man from the animal, the generalizing powers of pure reason, the love of perfectibility, the desire to know the unknown, and last and greatest, the ability to observe new phenomena and new relations, these mental faculties are deficient or seem to be so in all dark races. We know what race he is. Sheesh. Jeez. Underhanded compliment giving off. Is it then that there exists a vast region of the earth, the richest in all respects, the most productive, which the European cannot colonize, cannot inhabit as a laborer of the earth, as a workman, as a mechanic? From which should he expel the colored aboriginal races? He also must quit or cease to live, which he requires to till with other hands. It would seem so, and all history proves it. This zone is the last refuge of the colored man. Like the primeval forest of these very regions, the densely wooded banks of the Amazon and the Orinoco, against which it would seem as if human efforts were of little or no avail. The swarthy Negro. See, okay. So he says the swarthy Negro. Swarthy meaning dark. Negro. So I'm going to take Negro to mean anyone other than a European or an Asian. Because he's saying swarthy Negro. But then he said that the Hottentots were not Negroes. They were yellow Africans. So he's saying swarthy Negro, the swarthy Negro, the dark Negro. So he must think that there's a lighter Negro as well. So I'm thinking Negro means facial structure. The shape of your nose. It's hard to say because we don't all have the same nose, the same lips, you know? So I'm not sure how he's identifying people. What is it based on? I'm still trying to figure out what it's based on. The swarthy Negro and kindred races driven back, subdued, or reduced to slavery continually recover their pristine vigor and numbers, rolling back the white invasion, forcing it into other channels and compelling it to limit its aggressions to those quarters of the earth which nature seems to have assigned it. Did you hear that? It's not gonna be it's not gonna be guns, violence, all this other kind of stuff. It's not gonna be that. They're going to decay. It says the swarthy Negro and kindred races and like races driven back, subdued, and reduced to slavery, working for work's sake, continually recover their pristine vigor and numbers, rolling back the white invasion, forcing it into other channels, and compelling it to limit its aggressions to those quarters of the earth which nature seems to have assigned it. So the author, he sees a pattern. At last, at last, in Northern America, relieved by his own assertions, from the bayonet of the furious Celt and fiery Hun and brutal Muscovite. Relieved also from the Norman government of England, the pressure of the three estates, the Saxon found a place where unfettered he might display his real character. That is, the perfect democrat, the only race perhaps in the world absolutely and by nature democratical. This is the destiny of the Saxon race. And some of you know. Would it not have been better to have imported a Negro population as laborers? Whoa, 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 whoa. You hear that? Would it not have been better to have imported a Negro population as laborers? In India or Hindustan, we have the coolies and the laboring servile population of Hindustan. In Jamaica, the Negroes. In the southern states of America, our Saxon descendants employ the Negro. It is the same in Brazil, Cuba, and all tropical countries. In Morocco and Peru, it was precisely the same. The colored population alone could labor. The European was unequal to it. I incline, then, to the opinion that the dark races may for many ages hold the tropical regions, that many countries now in the military occupation of the fair races may and will revert to the dark, that it would be a better policy perhaps to teach them artificial wants and the habits and usages of civilization. Commerce alone, I think, can reach Central Africa. The Negro must be taught the value of his labor. The French would do well, perhaps, to encourage the immigration of coolies or Negroes as we do to the West Indies. The French would do well, perhaps, to encourage the immigration of coolies or Negroes as we do to the West Indies. I shall conclude with a single remark on the position of the copper-colored race or races of Northern America. and on the progress the question of race has made since the delivery of my first course of lectures on the races of men, when, some 10 or 15 years ago, I maintained publicly that neither the Saxon nor any other fair race transplanted into the American continent would during a historic period or era exhibit any important modifications in physical structure or psychological character as a result of climatic influences, or governmental, that is, conventional human arrangements. For all governments in church and state are merely accidental circumstances and human contrivances usually arranged for particular purposes. My opinions were met by such observations as the following. I was told, for example, that the men of the United States already differed from their Anglo-Saxon, German-Saxon, and Celtic forefathers and brethren physically and morally. My opinion then and now was that these assertions are devoid of all foundation and are based on a surface view of society. This opinion I developed more fully in a course of lectures delivered before the Philosophical Society of Newcastle about 5 years ago, in which I endeavored to show that the races had not altered by being transplanted to another, the American soil, that the Celtic race had carried with it all its characteristics unaltered and unalterable, that historians, journalists, and mankind generally mistook the slight modifications impressed on form and character for permanent alterations in the organic form of humanity, fancying they saw in the civilized Celt or Saxon a being totally different from the uncivilized one. This is the delusion I have always combated, and although at first the doctrine met with almost universal opposition, it makes its way with most unexpected rapidity, judging at least from some articles which have appeared lately in the daily press. In the brief reports of my lectures at various philosophic institutions, it will be found that the amalgamation of races in America or elsewhere had been distinctly denied by me for a period of more than 30 years. And in my first course of lectures carrying the doctrine to the American shores, I ventured to point out that after many ages, the Saxon, Celtic, Sarmatian, or Russ, and Aboriginal or copper-colored Indian would remain and be found to be quite distinct, that these races transplanted to the New World would endeavor to carry out their destinies as they had done and were now engaged with in the Old World, and that nationalities, however strong, could never in the long run overcome the tendencies of race. Had a statesman of Rome been told that a small nation would one day arise on the confines of Europe, secured by its insular position from the rude grasp of continental tyrannies, that this nation, after founding the greatest colony, North American Union, the world ever saw, should, through the folly and tyranny of its government, antagonistic of its race, aided by the brutal ignorance and intolerable selfishness of its own people, lose that colony forever, be driven from it with ignominy, leaving in the minds of a growing populations of millions and millions a rancorous and eternal hatred for the parent kingdom, and abhorrence of her and her rotten institutions, that statesman would have declared at once that no country could survive the shock of such an event. Yet England has stood it. that Saxon men will, on leaving England, become furious Democrats. I admit nothing will ever satisfy them but self-government, adopting, moreover, the land of selection for their own. The English become Canadians, Americans, etc. As the case may be. The Dutch assume the name of value, science. They detest all scientific men they place in one category. I may hereafter discuss the influence which discoveries in physical science have exercised over chronology. My present object is with the verification of certain events connected with Jewish and Coptic history, keeping ever in view the question of race. It is and always has been the practice of every race and nation whose intellectual faculties were sufficiently elevated to connect their history with the origin of all time and under one denomination or another to identify themselves with the great creative power. This practice seems not to have been confined to the fair races exclusively, for the Chinese, Mongolians by race, Japanese, Hindu, Copt are all more or less dark colored races, have, notwithstanding this, traced their origin to the gods and their priests made common cause with the creator of all things. On the American continent, the central group of the Aboriginal colored races. On the American continent, the central group of the Aboriginal colored races was running their narrow course when the Celtiberian and Lusitanian races burst in upon them, upsetting their idols and temples, their pyramids and obelisks, as the semi-barbarous Saxon and Celt and Goth burst on Rome, with the same results. The substitution of one form of civilization for another, of one race for another, none to hold their ground, but all to dwindle into a mere shadow. If there be a dark race destined to contend with the fair races of men for a portion of earth given to man as an inheritance, it is the Negro. The tropical regions of the earth seem peculiarly to belong to him. His energy is considerable. Aided by a tropical sun, he repels the white invader. From St. Domingo, he drove out the Celt. From Jamaica, he will expel the Saxon. And the expulsion of the Lusitanian from Brazil by the Negro is merely an affair of time. The hybrids of South America, with the low vitality of all hybrids, proceed rapidly to the destruction I was the first many years ago to foretell. Whilst in Northern America, the European races, forgetting the land of their origins, have given themselves new names. Black Americans have no culture. Black Americans don't have culture. Properly, American Indians don't have culture. Or at least that's what I'm told. do the right thing.